Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your lunch and the breakout sessions. 20 months after Chancellor Olaf Scholz' Zeitenwende speech at the start of a fundamental change to Germany's foreign and security policy, we want to evaluate what has been done, but we also want to shed a light on what still needs to be done. Germany faces multiple challenges: modernizing its armed forces, implementing a mental Zeitenwende, and protecting European security. Germany's determination to fulfill these tasks face a rigorous test, in and outside of Germany. Who better to discuss these questions with than the German Defense Minister, Boris Pistorius? He will join Britta Sandberg, Paris Bureau Chief of Der Spiegel, for a spotlight interview. Please.
Sie sitzen rechts. Herr Minister, Sie sind nun seit
Minister, it has been 11 months that you have been elected minister. 10 or 11 months? Well, sometime between 10 and 11 months. And you had a real great kick-off start. The Spiegel said, Minister Perfect. And you're very resolute and you take decisions. You are the most popular politicians, according to surveys in Germany. Isn't that strange to have such a lot of approval?
Yes. Well, that was a closed loop question, wasn't it? Well, I've got some more. Sure. I mean, on the one hand, you don't start an office like that with the expectation or with a goal of being the most favorite politician. I mean, that's not in the head, and that's not on the agenda. And the title was with a question mark, if I understood. Minister Perfect question mark. Well, it was the Spiegel magazine, wasn't it? Yes, indeed. So you're happy about it. It's great, especially when it lasts. But you know, and I know, and I've been around for long enough, it's going to go the other way around. We've had others who were green for a long time. Okay, you enjoy it, smile, and continue.
So far, you keep being popular. How would you describe the situation that you were confronted with when you started being in office? A dysfunctional ministry? You said you had no words, given the extremely complicated structures in the ministry, given all the applications that needed 17 signatures to finally get through. And you called it an organized disresponsibility. Nobody wanted to be ultimately responsible and shifted the burden on others.
The main problem was, I have to say, that's my insight, is so they didn't understand mistakes. So whoever's had made a mistake had a problem, and whoever experienced it once will never ever make a mistake again. And whoever doesn't want to make any mistake, well, ideally not take any decision, or not without reassurance, to put it bluntly. So, and adjusted to that, you had structures that were created or adapted time and again that would ideally reflect this. So at the beginning, I did have the impression, which I told about, the organizational chart, grown over decades, was not readable, because there was boxes in it without any lines or connections to the others. On the one hand, you had the pillar structure of Thomas de Maizière, and then there were satellites and balloons around them. So, and over the years, I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit to make it clear, just the structures which you didn't actually come to terms with. You had to circumvent that. That became even less clear, and the responsibility became even less clear too.
The reform is difficult when you have such complicated structures. You very early on said you want to simplify structures and processes, develop a lean ministry, reduce red tape.
Well, we're on the way. So 10 months are 10 months, right? It's not 10 years. So even if sometimes you think so, But otherwise, yes, so we've got the planning for the general staff, not just like before, but we do have it as an instrument, as a tool, where everything comes together. So the head of the brigade, General Major Feuding, always says it's the coherence machine. That's what we call it. So far we'd had a problem, and we presented that several times over. So the ministry, there was months and years that they worked on one subject, but in 2 or 3 departments side by side, and in part they didn't even know of one another. And then there was the point that somebody had to report to management at some point, and you couldn't understand, you couldn't agree on what that was, so we just let it lie. And then there were several positions were like pillars, and they were waiting to just be worn away, but that didn't happen. So, or they just agreed on the smallest common denominator, and the executive didn't know what was actually being discussed beforehand. So we're doing this with the planning and general staff, and but we've also got a smaller other example, the Munich Security Conference of February. Afterwards I learned, so before that I didn't have the time, that all 5 people in the executive level, so myself, the 2 state secretaries, as well as the GI, so at the Munich Security Conference, they had preparations done for themselves, but not that the people preparing them knew of the other people preparing the others. So theoretically, you had different statements and positions and votes. You went into the MSC. Or you would have done it if I hadn't noticed it by accident. But this can't be possible. This mustn't be possible because the ministry should speak with one voice, right? So these are the things that are being addressed, and the same as the very long list of whoever had to sign off on a decision. So I saw things like decisions taken in the inner ministry in Osnabrück or something. There was 8 or 9 civil servants who had to sign up the decision, and they went to the state secretary or ministry level. So you can't do that if you lose too much time, you don't have any decisions, and at the end of the day you're bad. And that's why the structures need to be changed, because that's what I want to say. So that's the experience after 10 months that was confirmed. It's really great people who work in the army and the ministry. So it's a different quality than 40 years ago. They can really do something. They're competent. They've got expertise. But due to the structures of the past decades, they were just stopped out.
We live in very special times, as we heard this morning. During the last couple of months, you have said repeatedly, Germany must be rendered fit for war. That is a very daring vocabulary for a minister coming from the Social Democrats. 10 years ago, they would have completely disagreed with you. Why did you use the term fit for war? You might have said fit for defense.
What is it about in the defense, to ask a question? So if you want to guarantee defense in the case of an attack, ideally by a defense ability, you want to prevent an attack because you've got a potential deterrent. So one prerequisite is that you are able to actually lead a war, as a defending war in this case, and that's the point, isn't it? And this is what you need to say. So fit for war, I mean, fit is an old word, isn't used much, so it doesn't mean just that it is a suitability, in other words. It's not a word used in other contexts. And fit for war means we are able, we have to know how to fight a defense war in order not to fight a war. So, and that is the formula. And I think that, so if you've got, if you take the new reality, which we are experiencing again after 30 years of peace, and we have to come to terms with it, and society needs to be taken on board, then needs to be prepared. Then we need to speak the words clearly and not trying to ensconce them with less unpleasant associations. And I believe that's what we have done. So the discussion is confirming this, and there's people who get worked up about the word, but not about the content.
That means that was an attempt to start the debates. The Chancellor talks about Zeitenwende. You talk about the mental Zeitenwende paradigm shift. So you wanted to trigger the Germans, make them awake.
Yeah, I think you have to make clear that Zeitenwende is more than 100 billion extra budget. That's, of course, important to then renovate the army to put it back into a condition that was 30 years ago. But that's not enough. If you want to prepare, so it seems like you're preparing for something, but if you want to be prepared for a possible attack against a certain threat, then this cannot be just the army, not just the Bundeswehr, but it's further parts of the society, protecting the infrastructure, etc. Look at the Israeli or Ukrainian societies, what they are facing, because they're in this danger and because they were aware of this danger that they're living in. In both cases, it actually happened. So in other words, it is important to call a spade and not just to say, okay, if we've got, we spent 100 billion, we've got new tanks, we've got new aircraft, everything's done. But that's not the case. So we have to do something with the Bundeswehr and at the ministry, but also in society as such. Things have to change. And every one of us, you can't say that you're too young, but all those who've gone through the Cold War know exactly what I'm talking about. So all these exercises in northern Germany, that's what we did regularly. And you know that the Allied would join in the military exercise. We knew that the Allied were here, but in Western Germany, the old Federal Republic, in order to defend NATO territory. And there was American, British soldiers were normal in the streets of many cities and towns in Germany. This is not the case because we're not the eastern flank anymore, but we're part of those who are actually defending the eastern flank.
Kriegstüchtig nicht auch.
And being fit for war, doesn't that mean you have to be capable of winning the war? So does that mean we have to be prepared for more?
You can do that, yeah, sure. But when I say fit for war, that we need to be fit for war, then, so just to say it again, it's important to say, so not to start a war, but it is that we want to be able to defend. We want to be so fit for defense and the war that any potential attacker will think about it 2 times or 3 times or just abandon it in the first place. This worked, and so nobody could prove the opposite in the Cold War. So that the armament expenditure 3 to 4% in the old Federal Republic, the NATO double decision, etc. So, be it whether it was monocause or not, I don't know, but there was a deterrent, and that contributed to no war taking place. So I believe that today we have to do something similar, not one-on-one, because the Cold War was different to a situation that we've got today. And that's why it's extremely important that we say what we can do and that we're prepared to do it. And of course, so the Bundeswehr embedded in NATO that is fit for war, that is fit for defense, and that can lead a fight will be a deterrence because the opponent needs to...
So we'd be able to win a war.
So, of course, when you are forced to go into war, then you should win it.
Wirklich neue Worte.
These are new words after 30 years of living in a comfort zone in the Federal Republic of Germany. What's interesting is that you mentioned many of these very uncomfortable things, but still you're popular with the Germans. Does that mean that something is changing in the mindset of our society? Or are you just such a kind guy and everybody likes you?
Well, whether I'm really nice, I don't know, but it's just... So that's always been my way of doing politics, also as a Lord Mayor. So I'm convinced that a problem that you do not see, or rather which you try to push aside because it's unpleasant, and it's not going to become smaller, it's going to become bigger. And I think in communication with regard to the people of our country, it's necessary to call a spade a spade. So without alarmism, without drama, so don't over-dramatize it, but not taboo it either. So that's the truth in between. So that's calling it a spade, so that everyone can understand it and that everyone can have an exchange about that. But if we, as a political responsible people, so like put the things like we just ensconce it into cotton wool of words, people won't accept that we've actually identified the problem because we can't express the problem.
Zu den Problemen.
Let's talk about the problems. That means you need money. You need a lot of money in order to implement your plans, to implement reforms, to render Germany fit for war. According to the decision of the Karlsruhe Constitutional Court, Germany undergoes a major crisis, budgetary crisis. We heard a declaration about that this morning from the Chancellor. Which of your projects are affected by the budget reforms? You have the 100 million dedicated fund, and there are other projects that are subject to a mixed financing structure, and additional funding will have to be needed. Last week, funding was suspended. What are your fears regarding the implementation of your projects, the ones that have not yet been approved?
As of today, no problem. Everything's going to be as before, so that's the reason that the special budget is secured by the Constitution. That's the only one. That's a big advantage. And all the the people we talked about, experts, as well as my ministry, as well as the finance ministry, are agreed with regard to the special budget. It's the same result. There's no, I'm not affected by this. So there's the precautionary measure that you just described was the immediate time after the ruling, 1 or 2 days. So my ministry said we're going to stop certain projects before they go into a long-term obligation. We don't know whether it works or not. But that within 24 hours, that was sorted out with exchange between our ministries. And it's clear now that we can continue and have to continue.
Aber woher nehmen Sie
How can you be sure? Saying that nothing concerns our ministry, Olaf Scholz said we have to examine all the spendings. The Minister of Finance, Christian Lindner, yesterday says we need a lot of efforts in order to set up our budget for 24. You've got some projects that are not just covered by the special fund. Couldn't it happen that the new geopolitical role of Germany that you would like Germany to be fit for will be stopped because of a lack of funds?
That's why I said as of today, but as of today, there's no indication. Both the finance minister as well as the chancellor say it's important to have the expenditure secured by the special budget for the Bundeswehr, and especially on the background of the international 2% goal that we've agreed on.
wo wir beim nächsten
That brings us to the next problem. You mentioned the 2% goal, the 2% GDP to be spent on defense and armament. If that is no longer covered by the special fund, and the special fund is going to expire at the end of 27 or 28, what are you going to do then? Do you have a plan?
Well, I could say, well, it's not my task to have a plan like that because I'm just a minister, but I'm not responsible, I could say that. But of course, the fact is that all those responsible in the government as well as the parliament are clear on this. If the special budget has been used up, and that's going to be 2027 or 2028 at the latest, then in the budget we need, so there's, in my plan, we need to close a gap, and that's around about the magnitude of, I'd say, I'll give you a range because everyone's got a different number, between 15 and 25 billion euro. So somewhere in between, that's the truth. So everyone knows that that's going to need to be covered, and according after the decision of the budget 2024, we then need to address the budget 2025, because then we're talking about the medium-term finance planning, and we have to think about this, where to get the money from. But I mean, this is not anything we have to do now because it's not part of the budget 2024 yet, and but everyone knows that this is going to come.
ärgert Sie nicht
Aren't you sometimes angry about the limited debt?
Well, I was never a fan, I must say, because I always said the way it's described, designed, it's a brake on investment. And when I look at the infrastructure today in Germany, don't need to tell you about the ugly examples: digitization, roads, bridges, railways, etc. So then, of course, we're going to leave the next generation an infrastructure that will require investments that you're not going to be able to catch up in decades, and probably it's going to be more expensive than if we, in a low interest rate context, we could have had the debt to keep up the. But that's water under the bridge. I mean, we've got the brake on the debt, and we have to handle it, and that's how we're going to do.
Wenn wir jetzt schon so
Since we talk about the things one can be angry about, what else are you angry about? 1.5 weeks ago, you've been to Ukraine. They're facing the next wartime winter. You said the Ukraine needs to win. It doesn't look like that at the moment. Ukrainian generals talk about an even situation. Russia is attacking more and more aggressively. Are you angry that the West, that Germany can't deliver more and more quickly? There was a discussion about the Taurus.
Ik heb irgendwie een störung.
So I've got a problem with my mic. Shall I say it again? No. Well, I'm not. So generally, I am not a person who likes to get all frustrated. So I'm annoyed, and that's one of the few points about this crooked picture that we've got there. On the one hand, yes, at the beginning, the aid could have been faster. So, but we've left that behind. So we're the second largest supporter of the Ukraine. We deliver, by the week, we deliver goods to Ukraine. So I've been to the Ukraine, both Zelensky and Ukrainov supported this, and they're grateful for the help as such, but also for the reliability. So, and Umarov said, Germany says they're going to deliver, and they deliver, whereas others say they'll deliver, and then it'll take some time. Second problem, so even if it all costs a lot of money, money is not the first issue here in this context, but the problem is, meanwhile, the production. So in many areas, take artillery munitions, it's not enough. We've got framework contracts with industry, but production cannot, objectively, obviously, cannot be increased to the degree that munitions are needed, and that's the greatest challenge at the moment. Second example, where we're very good, so our IRST air defense system, or the American Patriots from our stock, or the old Gepard tanks, meanwhile, is 60. That we've got in Ukraine, so together with the Gepard munitions that we produce in Germany, because the Swiss don't want to deliver. So all of that will salvage and save lives in Ukraine. Ukrainians know this, and they feel better prepared for the winter than the last winter, also thanks to the many systems we've got available.
litauische
The Lithuanian Minister for Foreign Affairs this morning said, we haven't completely understood that this conflict is about us, affects us directly. Otherwise, Europe would have sent many more weapons long ago. What's the price that the West will have to pay? You always said Putin mustn't win. Let me repeat that question. I know you're doing everything you can, but don't we have a window of opportunity before the US election takes place? And you keep talking about speeding up as far as Ukraine is concerned.
But speed, in this case, is a question of industry. Speed, in this case, is a question of cooperation of state and industry. So I was told, I'm the first defense minister for many years who actually personally talks to industry. So before that, they didn't do it for whatever reason. I'll just leave it as that. And that's the first important point. Industry needs increased production in every aspect. And they say they need contracts. That's a bit difficult. What they need is a certain reliability. They need reliability. So if they open up a production line, that the munitions, the tanks, the vehicles, whatever, will then be bought for the duration that they need to pay off this the investment. That's okay. We can, for instance, in munitions plants, and actually make planning easier in the interest of the defense, because we also depend on the delivery from abroad. So the question is what the Lithuanian foreign minister says, I believe, cannot be relating to Germany, because he talked of Europe, and he knows exactly what we delivered, and he knows exactly that we said we're also going to station in Lithuania, the eastern flank of NATO. We've got a robust brigade with 5,000 people. He couldn't have met us.
gerne zum Schluss
At the end, I'd like to briefly talk about common European security policy. During the Bundeswehr conference, you said recently Germany has to be a strong country in the middle of Europe and must be a backbone of collective defense and deterrence. The French President Emmanuel Macron also wants to be stronger and strengthen Europe's role in the world, and he talks about a strategic autonomy of Europe. France give declarations, and you don't talk much about France.
Also ich bin
That's not true. I'm a friend of France, and I've got a very good relationship with my Sébastien Lecornu, my colleague in France. So we've got FKs. FKs is the aircraft and the tank system of the future. We're very far, and by the end of the year, so we're going to have agreed who's going to do what. That was a bone of contention for a long time. So the end of this year, the end of this year, and we're going to introduce it in January. So we're very far there. So France is there, but you can't actually mention everything in every speech. A speech would become even longer than that. So strategic autonomy. So I think strategic autonomy is difficult. So, so when we, as a European Union, or as a European NATO member, say, well, we want to move away from what? The transatlantic treaty? Then we have to wait what the White House, who's going to move in a White House.
Und trotzdem versucht.
But you can't be transatlantic and
Es gibt zwei Aspekte.
So this is what I was going to say. So the one is armament policy, and over the past 30 years, we didn't have a good development in the past 30 years in armaments. So in many areas we're not up to the market, and in other areas we are. And that's a very important lesson that we're learning from Ukraine, is the interoperability, interchangeability of the systems, the munition systems. That's what we neglected. So I don't know how many different types we've got, meanwhile, of the 155 artillery munition. So that's unbelievable. So we cannot afford that. So if in the certain eastern flank we have to fight together, it can't be the case that we've got different artillery munitions or tank munitions. So that needs to be brought together again. So we've seen that with the Baltic countries, with the Brits and Canadians. We saw that with our pre-positioning, but that's a very clear goal, just like the development. So when you look at ESSE, the European Sky Shield Initiative, so initiated by the Chancellor, we've got 19 signatories. That's sensational, also neutral. Switzerland and Austria, that's good. And it shows in implementation, and that was clear from the beginning, that the systems that we need for the long-range air defense, that we don't actually have that in Europe. So not yet, I must say. So Macron says, well, we have to develop them, and we've got time enough. We're currently not threatened. So, I mean, you can have a dispute about that assessment, but we say we're so threatened that we don't want to wait for 10 years until we've developed something. So that's why we decided to procure Arrow 3. So
Fast am Ende.
we have nearly reached the end.
But you can see, I mean, armament policy, yes, and armament cooperation to define it newly in Europe and have common developments is important. When I look at the White House and our role as a European NATO members, regardless of who's going to move into the White House, the one case would be a catastrophe, the other case would be much better. But even the better case, so foreseeable that the USA will have their focus more on the Indo-Pacific region. If they do that, they're probably not going to be able to have their commitment in Europe at the same level. So in other words, at that point, at the latest, we have to take up more responsibility.
Ja, klar. The NATO.
Well, that's what it's all about. So at the end of the day, all NATO partners need to spend 2%. So at the same time, we shouldn't neglect international commitment. The more stable Indo-Pacific, also with our help, the less awareness do the Americans have to use there, and the more balance internationally.
Herr Minister.
Minister, thank you very much for your time, for your statements. It was nice to have you here.
I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.